Hello, everybody. It's great to see you again. We hope that you've had a wonderful afternoon and that you've been able to wander around the wandering. And looking forward very much to the second episode of that composition of that artwork this evening at 8 o'clock. We are now going to move to our second panel discussion. This is our first panel discussion, but the second, well, I think you all know where we are. And very excited to be talking about gender in art song and within the context of innovation in art song. And I'm going to bring forward Cathy Compton, who is going to introduce the panelists. Cathy is a doctoral student at the Jacobs School of Music, studying with Marianne Hart, who has been such a legendary member of our faculty for many, many years. She was chair of the voice department for many years and is a great art song singer and advocate and commissioner. And so I hope that Marianne is somewhere around. I know that she popped in earlier on this afternoon. So without further ado, Cathy, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. Yes, I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly before we get started with our discussion. And I just encourage you to read more in depth about each of these wonderful individuals on the Summit website. And then after I do the introductions, I'm going to be turning it over to each panelist for some introductory remarks about how issues of gender impact their work. And then as we continue, if anybody has questions or comments, please feel free to utilize the chat function on Zoom. Or you could use the Slack channel to chime in, and then Spencer and Colin and I will be keeping an eye out for you and include your questions in our conversation. So first, it's my great honor to welcome Ricky Ian Gordon to the panel and to Slack. He just downloaded Slack.
It still doesn't work yet, though.
Oh, no. So Ricky Ian Gordon is a leading writer of vocal music that spans art song, opera, and musical theater. His songs have been performed and recorded by the most internationally renowned singers of our time, including Renee Fleming, Nadine Sierra, Stephanie Blythe, Denise Graves, Audra McDonald, Frederica von Stade, Carolyn Blackwell, Betty Buckley, and of course, IU's own Carol Van Ness and Marianne Hart, among many others. A highly prolific composer, his catalog also includes many more operatic works, song cycles, and songbooks. He has been a visiting professor at colleges and universities throughout the country. Next, Mari Esabel Valverde is an award-winning composer and singer in steady demand across the United States and Canada. Based in North Texas, she sings in multiple professional ensembles and teaches singing and transgender voice training with True Voice Lessons. She holds degrees from St. Olaf College, the European American Musical Alliance in Paris, France, and San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Matthew Valverde has been praised for his sensitive phrasing, mellifluous singing, and his handsome tenor voice in the Star Tribune and New York Classical Review. He was awarded a DMA degree and an MM degree in vocal performance and literature from the Eastman School of Music. Valverde is Associate Professor of Music at Adams State University in Alamosa, Colorado, where he also serves as Inclusive Excellence Liaison, supporting initiatives of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He has performed solo recitals and been featured nationally in many concerts and operas, and he made his Carnegie Hall debut in May 2014. Cloe Gentile Reyes is a PhD candidate in musicology at UC Santa Barbara. Her research focuses on issues of sexism and anti-Blackness in US, Latinx, and Puerto Rican music throughout the 20th century. She is particularly interested in the fluidity between genres of the bolero, salsa, rap, and reggaeton, and evolving representations of women and whiteness. So now I'm going to turn it over to each panelist to say hello, offer a few words of introduction on their own, and panelists, you can feel free to respond to what gender issues you consider or interact with in composing, performing, teaching, or researching art song, or feel free to just offer opening thoughts on your own. So we are going to start with Ricky Ian Gordon. Please feel free to chime in.
Hi, everybody. All right, I have to just say a major thing, which is it's not something I think about, but I think it's a provocative question. And I just had this experience where do you guys know who Justin Austin is? He's a black baritone, and he just recorded, it's on his Instagram, a song of mine called Song for a Dark Girl. And it was the first time I've ever heard a man sing that song, and it is remarkable. And so if anything, I think that this is a good time to be doing this panel, because I love the idea of that happening more, of encouraging more men to sing my songs that are written for women and more women to sing my songs that are written for men. You know, it just was like, it was very eye-opening, and it was a whole other take on that song. It was really exciting to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think Matthew Valverde is going to have a lot of thoughts on that same topic too. But right now, let's move to our next composer, Mari Esabel Valverde. Feel free to jump in with your opening introduction.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet y'all. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I am a transgender woman, so gender and sex and sexuality is something that is forced onto me, regardless of whether I'm thinking about it. So I can't live a single day of my life without making people make me think about my gender. So what that does in choral spheres, I mostly am composing choral music, although I love art song and I have composed some, but not nearly as many as Ricky Ian Gordon. I can't divorce the idea of someone's gender from their voice and from their voice from the music. And what that means to me is that we're in the process of de-emphasizing gender in the sense that there's more focus on the voice and more focus on the music. When you're less focused on body parts, you hear more of the music, and you feel more and you understand more of the music. So for somebody who's transgender and sings, you know, calling somebody soprano, alto, tenor, bass is very confining. And I think when we look specifically at art song is just like a microscope onto human feeling. And, you know, anybody can sing anything, and different songs take different meaning with different voices. And that's a very beautiful thing. And I think that's enough to put into the barrel for now.
Yes, thank you so much. I think you raised a lot of really interesting points. Let's move on to Matthew for now.
Buenas tardes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Matthew Valverde, and I use he, him pronouns. I am associate professor of voice here at Adams State University in Southern Colorado, and I teach all of the vocal classes here and voice lessons as well to the students. I actually am even directing the choir this semester, so I'm kind of everything vocal person right now while my colleague is on sabbatical. So my journey with gender and song is a little bit personal, and that as I was working through my graduate studies at Eastman, I really wanted to sing some music with poetry, some songs that had poetry that resonated with me. And when I presented those to some coaches and instructors and other people, I got some pushback a little bit. Questions like, "Are you really going to sing this?" Or "That's not really done by tenors." And I think, well, I'd like to do it. I love this music and I love the text, and I want to, I'm going to give it a shot. A funny thing is that I sang a Wolf song for Roger Vignoles, and he called me a raging drag queen sorceress, and that kind of really, made me think, what's going on? Of course, I was in a suit, so I don't know exactly how I was a drag queen at that moment, but I think that really revealed to me that gender and performing gender and prescribing gender onto other people as you're listening was a very real thing. I've sung a lot of songs that I think are traditionally reserved for women, including Coyotes, by Ricky and Gordon, and I sang that for you there at the TCU American Festival of Song quite a few years back.
Wow.
And you said, I'd never heard this done by a man before, but it's good. And so, kind of with permission from composers and from other people, I've been taking that into my teaching. And so for me, it's a really personal thing because I'm trying to get my students to be as personal and as expressive as possible. And that means for them to navigate and to negotiate their ideas of gender, their ideas of their own gender. And this is for cisgender people and for transgender people, for all humans. We're kind of working through this process. And so, my goal is for my students to sing as healthfully and as clearly and as emotionally and as powerfully as they can. And if they are blocked by, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't sing this song because it says him or it says her, or maybe there are other types of issues that they feel as barriers, I do everything I can to help my students to break those barriers down so that they can feel comfortable in what they're doing. And of course, then that leads to the voice working well. It leads to a more powerful performance. So there's a little bit of stuff there.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Thank you so much. Yeah, actually, as both you and Mari were talking, it's making me think about music theater types and how oftentimes in music theater we'll go into, oh, is this a female role or a male role? And we can go so much further beyond that, not only in music.
As if those are our only choices.
Exactly. And so thinking beyond that and thinking how art song can be a way for us, a lens for us to use, to go beyond that for us and for our students. Thank you. So let's move on to Chloe. And I believe Chloe is going to share her screen with us.
Yes. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm gonna go through a quick PowerPoint because I'm a huge nerd and I love PowerPoint. So I just wanted to begin with some opening thoughts about the male gaze and the need for intersectionality in art song. So in my research, I'm trying to click and it's not really. Okay, so in my research, I've looked a lot at types of imagery of women that are most prevalent in art song. And so what's true through and through is that there are so many stereotypes, but they do differ according to each tradition, according to nationalism, racial hierarchy. And so just quickly going through, in German art song, we see a lot of times women are compared to things in nature, like little flowers. And so the problem with that is that it's dehumanizing. Women don't talk back, right? They're objectified. We see a lot of fair maidens, so women are white or pale. And those are usually what we see as being the objects of desire, right? In French art song, we see a lot of negative stereotypes of Romani women. The exotic woman archetype is really prevalent. Spanish art song, we see a lot of the mother-whore dichotomy is really prevalent. Women are either sinners or saints, evil or saintly, I guess. Italian art song, Romani women come back a lot. So why do we have this? So I make sense of it using the theory of the male gaze, which is conceptualized by Laura Mulvey. Basically says women are predominantly seen in the arts through heterosexual male viewpoint that objectifies and hypersexualize them. So what's important here is it's not a male viewpoint, right? It's a heterosexual male viewpoint. So intersectionality is intricately woven into what we're talking about. And I'm getting this idea of intersectionality from law and race scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And it speaks to the ways in which different systems of oppression kind of feed and uphold each other. So these are structural issues, right? They're institutionally backed. In our case, it's music departments and concert halls, right? And they're all kind of working together. And another thing is it's not just the gaze, right? We have the white male ear, the white male voice. So these are basically theorizations for how we've come to, back up the fact that Western classical music is the most academic endeavor of all types of music, right? Like that's all we study in academia, which is changing, right? But this is kind of like how that comes, right? Like, why do we even call it art song? What makes this type of song more artful than other types of song? And so a lot of race scholars have also talked about the voice. And so there's a lot of conceptualization there of sonic minstrelsy or sonic blackface. And this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about should non-Black singers sing spirituals, right? So this is kind of where we're going there, and it has a lot of implications for performers, as I'm sure you all could say, but I've had personal experiences, you know, feeling like a puppet for the male gaze, thinking about white women as a woman of color, singing about, you know, heteronormativity. And so this internalization, which is what we do when we're embodying a character, right, is known to cause a lot of issues, right? Negative body image, reduced female speaking, all of these things. So this is what brought me to musicology from my performance degree. And I have work on Libby Larson that we'll probably get into, but what do we need, right? We need women, queer folks, people of color represented, and we need them in all of our kind of facets of music studies, right? Like, especially as musicologists, we need them as musicologists, right? Like, we're the ones making the history, we're the ones that erase women from the histories and people of color, right? So another thing, quick note, is we need to stop or start gender bending songs. So what I mean by that is there's a tradition in coachings and lessons where we're kind of told like, oh, you can change those pronouns so that you can be singing about a love interest that is your opposite gender. And that's kind of just become performance practice. So that's another thing that I just like to throw out there.
Thank you so much. And since you brought up body image and in eating disorders, actually specifically, that brings me to a question. I want to take it back to Ricky. And I actually want to start with a question that is a little bit outside the realm of art song, which is your recent opera, Ellen West, which is a beautifully wrenching piece with poetry by Frank Bedart. And it raises the issue of eating disorders and the pressure to kind of be perceived in a certain way. And one of the stanzas from the poem is, why am I a girl? I ask my doctors and they tell me they don't know that it is just given, but it has such implications. And sometimes I even feel like a girl. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you approached, even selected this poetry, and how did you know that you wanted it to take on an operatic form, and then just what considerations went into how you empathized with this character?
I'm so glad you asked me about that. And you know that she says, I mean, the poet, or in the prologue, he says Ellen was obsessed with eating and the arbitrariness of gender, and how to have the prison of the body, or what. And I chose it because it mirrored my struggle in many ways. You know, I had my own issues with eating disorder growing up. Gay, you're always marginalized, and it was unbelievably resonant to me. I mean, I read it maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years before I set it to music, but just the opening line, I love sweets, heaven would be dying on a bed of vanilla ice cream, but my real self is thin, all profile and elegant gesture, the kind of, but it's all about, it's so funny because everything that you guys have been saying, it's so nice to hear you articulate those things. But I really was drawn to it, Cathy, because of personal reasons. I had never, ever heard anyone articulate the plight of someone with an eating disorder, especially in terms of what it means to be in a body, you know, and what you're trying to do when you starve yourself or when you purge, in terms of what does your body represent to you. It's just, and Frank Bedart's whole thing about Ellen West, because he took it from a real case study. She was a real person. I mean, that's a fake name, but he his aim was to get to the bottom of something in that poem, and I really felt like he did. Just to say that if I had to pick, though, the one reason I always knew I was going to set it from the moment I read it. First of all, because it was in two voices, the doctor's voice and Ellen's voice. I knew immediately it was vocal. It tells a very clear narrative. And then at the end, and this is the big thing, is she writes a letter to her friend before she kills herself. And she says, dearest, I remember how at 18 on hikes with friends, when they rested, sitting down to joke or talk, I circled around them, afraid to hike ahead alone, yet afraid to rest, for I was not yet truly thin. And what I identified myself, but what I think is really powerful in what she's saying there is how we are all crippled by expectation. And to transcend what other people expect of us by what our gender is, what our sexuality is, what color our hair is, it is the hugest thing, right? To become free of the baggage of other people's expectations. And it's been my whole career, even breaking free of what critics think of my work, that it can't matter. It can't affect my voice.
I love what you said about expectations, and I think at the beginning you'd mentioned like the prison of the body. And Chloe, I'm wondering if you would be able to respond to that. I know in your research you've talked about what liberation means and how liberation is represented. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think the question of liberation or reclamation is really nuanced, especially when we have so many competing identities just within ourselves. And so some of the art songs that I first went to after kind of being a performer and feeling really marginalized is had text by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She's known as like the mother of Mexican feminism. And what's interesting about that is that I realized that, women and marginalized people, right, like we internalize these systems and we perpetuate them. And we police each other, right? And that's what makes these systems so powerful, is that they start to make the oppressed the oppressor, right? And so I think, when thinking about liberation, that's always on my mind. And I think that there's no such thing as kind of just this is going to change the game kind of thing. There's always a side to it where you're like, but it's still perpetuating this thing, right? And so in the case of Sor Juana, like she has a lot of love poetry to Maria Luisa, and so she's like this queer icon, but she also writes about her beautiful flowing blonde hair, and so I'm like, you're still talking about white women. So it's just, I don't know what else to say other than it's never as clear cut as we want it to be, and that's why it's taking so long to kind of really progress, or what I see as being like real progression. So yeah.
I'd love to comment just something really quick there. I think we're bound by tradition, and we're bound by the development of an aesthetic, right? And so like you said, we hold this oppression within ourselves, and then we put it on top of others, right? And the last thing that we want to hear or see in a performance is somebody who's limited, right? And so it really is unhelpful to us in so many ways. Just to kind of just put a point on it, I did my doctoral research on like gender in music and gender in art song, and I had one of the professors send another student to me because that baritone wanted to sing Frauenliebe und Leben. And so he wanted to have a whole discussion with me about like, what does your research say, and what, all this stuff. And I'm like, listen, if you love the songs, if you can sing them well, you know the text, your German is good, please. That's all I need, right? That's all I need. But he's limited by recordings. He was limited by the institution. He was limited by the teacher. And there was a lot of this stuff going on. And so even with our best attempts, we still kind of get stuck in a box.
Thank you so much. Yeah, actually, Matthew, I think that's a great segue too to, I think the phrase you used was deconstructing gender specificity in art song performance. And that's such a great example with Frauenliebe und Leben, which has some, problematic issues with it. Are there other examples that you could point to in your own singing or teaching? And what possibilities have you noticed in this work that this opens up for you and your students?
Thank you for that. I think the thing that always happens, whether it's me performing something that is maybe non-traditionally performed by a tenor, or one of my students or a colleague doing music like that, it's never it never results in a, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done that. Especially if you're singing in an appropriate key and your voice can handle the tessitura and can handle all of the things. The singer knows what they can and cannot do, and if they don't, the teacher will guide them and be like, you're not ready for this song yet, or maybe let's try this down a third, something like that. And so it never results in this, I don't know, that the world goes into chaos because a man saying, "Seid ich ihn gesehen" or something. I think we have much more fear about what will happen than what actually happens once somebody performs music that way. So I don't know. I have countless stories of students kind of thwarting gender expectations. It's sometimes described as cross singing, which I understand where that comes from, but can't we just sing? Can't we just talk about it that way? So every time a student wants to do something outside of these norms, they come to that piece with energy and love and desire and focus, and they spend time on the text. So what's the result? A beautiful performance, an engaged performance, or at least an interesting one. And so, I think it always leads to someplace good.
Thank you for that. I want to go to, it looks like we have a raised hand question. Eileen, would you unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you so much. I was also following along because I had similar thoughts to what's going on in the chat. Like what Julia brought up when Chloe was, I'm going to kind of tie in what Matthew was talking about and Chloe, just a little quick brief history of mine. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy. I went to Westminster Choir College. I'm a grad from IU Jacobs School of Music a long time ago with my master's degree. But I'm an art song fanatic. And I also teach private voice, piano, flute, and music theory. And I always want my students to feel like they can make any song their own, because I was very fortunate in where I went to school in that they encouraged this discussion like back in the early 2000s, right? So, and in the late 90s. And we talked about this in our art song classes, and we discussed like, do you need to change it? If you're a woman and you want to sing this, do you need to change the pronoun? And we talked about, well, no, but you could sing it from like the perspective that you're reading a letter from that person to you, or, but if you want to change the pronoun, you should feel that that's okay. And so that's where I sang all kinds of stuff that wasn't in my file, because there's so much great music written for men. And I was like, well, shoot, I want to sing that too. And my teachers were super supportive of it. So we actually did a bunch of, we called them all fucked up recitals, where we had women singing men's stuff and women singing men's stuff, men singing women's stuff, and switching gender roles all the time, like all through college and grad school. So it's just really interesting now that this conversation is becoming a much more serious and public kind of conversation, more than it used to be, where it was just meant for the classroom or within studios and things like that. So my question, I guess, to Chloe is, you had said that we should stop switching our pronouns when we and encouraging people to switch pronouns when we're singing songs. But if that makes it a more personal experience for me, like, heteronormal, anything aside, right? Why can't I do that? Why do you think that's inappropriate? Or do you think that's inappropriate still?
No, definitely not. I'm more talking about just the fact that it's kind of practice to ask, and kind of, if there is a pronoun, like I've been asked so many times in coaching, like, or just told, right? Like just change that pronoun, right? And there's
okay, not like sing whichever pronoun you want to sing, kind of a thing.
No, sing your pronoun. Sing what makes you happy. I'm just saying, as an like institutional practice, I think there's kind of like a norm in lessons and coaching. Like maybe, I mean, it sounds like you've had an amazing schooling. So
I was really fortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, there's just times where you're just told like change those pronouns with zero question about sexuality, your own gender identification, like none of that, you know? So yeah, so I also had in parentheses like stop or start, right? So so according to what you need to do, just do that with the pronouns. But I think as a practice with, you know, voice teachers, coaches, we just need to stop like thinking that we should automatically change these pronouns to equal heterosexual love, essentially.
Right. I totally, I agree 100%. I mean, I've always encouraged my students to use whatever pronouns they feel like, but I also like to have the conversation of perspective as well. So if you do sing a song that's written as a female, if you sing a song that's written for a male and they're using female pronouns speaking about their love, and you're not a lesbian, you're not gay, whatever. I think it's an interesting conversation to have with students that you could be singing it from the male's perspective about their loved one, right? So, but then how do we get that conversation going with voice teachers in schools now to like further this discussion with upcoming artists and with current singers, right? So that we can sort of stop this cycle, like you said. So that's sort of across the panel. I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Can I say something about that? I wanted to say that only because I think it would be more interesting if instead of people changing pronouns to enter the piece as it is, to enter the piece as it is written. I mean, we're talking about the male gaze, right? The white male gaze. So what if you enter the piece and it's a man singing a love song to a woman? It doesn't mean you're a lesbian. It just means enter the piece at where it is and see where that takes you. That is more interesting to me as a composer, especially someone that writes texts as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting as a storyteller, as a singer as well, right? To put yourself into that perspective that you don't identify with, right? And
yeah,
I sing a bunch of Chopin songs about, you know, loved ones writing letters from the war front, and like I have zero experience with that, but putting myself in that person's shoes from the poetry, I think was a really rewarding experience for me as the artist, and I hope that it connected with the audience in a different way, like you're saying, Ricky.
I love this idea of perspective, and I want to turn it to Mari because I know that a lot of the times you're working with texts that you have been commissioned to work with. But when you do select a text, and this Ricky could go to you too, but when you do select a text, what are you looking for? What draws you in, and how do you approach empathy? How do you approach gender? How do you approach what stories you're interested in telling and what impact that's going to have in society?
So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm hyper focused on gender because that's what the world demands from me. And I'll turn around and just say that when we do this gender flipping, if you want to call it, what it does is just, it reveals more of the humanity. It reveals more honesty. It demands more honesty from everybody. I think that, for example, if you took an opera and put on an opera and made all of the roles played by women, cis women, trans women, just, women, the people who watch the opera would maybe realize misogyny where they didn't, and then, oh, well, that's a misogynistic opera. Well, that's one of the mainstream operas that's what people are paying for. That's what sells. So I just wanted to comment on the conversation that was happening. But in my own music, I usually don't pick the text. I don't like that pressure. And I highly prioritize working with a living poet, someone that I can correspond with and learn about and collaborate with. And at the beginning of this presentation, I thought about a couple of things I could share. I don't want to take too much time to do that, but I'll just mention the pieces, both of which my brother has sung. One piece called The Lady and the Tiger. And if you read the poem, my brother sings the part of the lady. And the tiger is sung by the bass clarinet. And there's, you know, a whole conversation that happens within 5 minutes. And at the end of the piece, the tiger consumes the lady. And there's a bunch of sexual connotations in that piece. But, you know, the performance of the piece was a cis woman playing piano, a cis woman playing bass clarinet, and a cis man singing a part by a woman. And that to me is normal, completely normal. There's no dissonance to that at all. Because, well, these ideas of, if you were to write down the criteria of what is female characteristics and what is male characteristics, and you stick by that when you are writing, then you're robbing every singer of their full humanity. And what I mean by that is, you know, a man gets, you know, should not be robbed of the pleasure of feeling sexualized and liking it. Do you understand what I mean? Like I think that with The Lady and the Tiger, there is that sexiness that shouldn't just belong to women. And we can talk about objectification. I'm not trying to conflate things, but just the idea of a man receiving pleasure, you know, that is really quite normal. And that's what I mean. Like when we do this in practice, what it does is it colors in our experiences, and we're having more honest, deeper conversations. The other piece of music that I was going to talk about is called El Triste León, from a song cycle that I'm currently writing, also sung by my brother. It's folk songs, and there's definitely misogyny. It's all in Spanish, and there's definitely some misogyny in some of these stanzas. I've chosen not to set certain stanzas because of the misogyny, but at the same time, the stanzas that I believed were integral to the message of the song, I kept and I set. And in one of the poems, you know, he literally is complaining how women are. Hay mujeres como son. And literally in the practice of the premiere, I said, lean into the toxic masculinity. And we had a wonderful violinist, a woman playing the violin part to accompany the song. And I told her, I need you to be a toxic man right now.
I love that. And, you know, that thinking about toxicity and objectification and desire and sexuality in art song, you know, to me, that all goes back to an idea of a power dynamic and who has power, who takes power. So this is a question for any of the panelists, but how do you think about creating a power dynamic, either in a character or in the music, or through your performance?
You know, it's funny because I'm still on your last question, Cathy, because I was thinking, I love text and I love words, and I've always loved poetry. And it's so simple for me. I set the texts I love. I don't think about gender. I don't think about what it's going to do for the world politically. I don't think about any of that. I trust my instinct as an artist. And maybe it's because my sexuality has always been apparent. I don't know, but and even in terms of power dynamics, like that question, it's almost, sometimes I feel like musicology is for musicologists, not composers, because I don't think there's so much thinking going on sometimes. It's instinctive. And even in terms of or not speaking for you, Mario, just speaking for myself, but I always feel like I come from what I think the character is doing. What is in the doing of the character? You know what I mean? What's the necessity? What's the danger of the character? And how can I illuminate that with my music? You know, it's all storytelling to me.
And you're inspired, so you're inspired by texts and also by specific individuals, right? I mean, there's a long list of people who you have worked with and written for. How does that factor in the identity of the person's voice in your head? I think even the song that we heard, Just an Ordinary Guy, as we came in, was that a Kristen Chenoweth in your head sort of thing?
Yes, yeah, it's Kristen. But like a really good example is my opera 27, which was written for Stephanie Blythe. And I knew that, St. Louis asked me if I could write an opera for Stephanie Blythe, and I said Gertrude Stein. And it's because Stephanie is a big woman with a big personality, a big voice, and if you know Stephanie, she presides. If you're in a room with her, she presides. So Gertrude Stein was the perfect personality for her. It just made sense to me. And the big zeitgeist issue at the time was gay marriage. So it inadvertently, for me, ended up being a celebration of the greatest gay marriage of the 20th century. I mean, just like these two women who were married, called each other man and wife, were Jewish, and everything about it. They stayed alive, and it's like remarkable. The courage it took to be them. So so anyway, but I a lot of it is instinctive for me. Maybe sometimes I should think more politically, but I think sometimes if you're connected to the world, you are political, and the personal is political. You don't necessarily have to wear it on your sleeve. It's there. If you're in the world and you're being truthful, it's politics.
Can I bounce back on that really quickly?
Yeah.
Because I go into a lot of these spaces talking about how my music is political. They don't get to glean that my music is political. I go and saying, this is supposed to be violent, by the way. Because to me, it's like, yes, everything is political. Even if you don't think it's political, everything is political. And I think where I want that to go is I want people to have difficult conversations. And
yes,
the music that we do is the best excuse to be having those conversations. So that's kind of where I'm at. People are it's taboo to talk about the political side of things, but there's a lot to unload.
No, I love that. And yes. I thought about. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Matthew.
Please, no, please go ahead.
No, you go, and then I'll go. Yeah. Or whatever. Yeah.
I was just going to comment upon Cathy's question about power and kind of what you were saying, Ricky, and as Madi as well. I think power is I love that you asked that question, because it's a thing that I think we don't think about all the time. As a young singer, a lot of times we are not we're not giving ourselves permission to take power. And that is in a rehearsal where a conductor is leading you. That is in a rehearsal with the pianist where maybe you want to make sure that you're coordinating with them. But then, of course, there's times where the singer has to take power, right? And has to kind of lead in charge. And so, but you want to do that in a way that's collaborative and isn't kind of disregarding the artistry of the other people in the room with you when we could gather in rooms together. And so I think, for me, I was that kid who wanted to be a good student. So I was like, let me do my homework, let me do this, let me do my translation, let me come in. And I say, is this okay? May I do this, right? I approached the music and my performance from a powerless position because I was trying to match the aesthetic and do what my teacher said and get a degree and all of these things. And so, these are like, we're fraught with these issues because it's around us at all times. And that doesn't make a good artist, right? And a good artist is somebody who just goes out and does it, right? And so we have to navigate that a bit. So we as performers and as teachers, and developing singers, we have to be sensitive to that. And then I think also that means not only taking the power, but also being vulnerable to be penetrated by the power, and what power there is in that vulnerability. Because there's sometimes where you just got to be quiet and the interlude has to happen, and that has to fuel you for your next entrance, right? And really being able to navigate, I'm fully taking charge of this moment and I'm fully let go and I'm letting this moment happen to me. You have to be able to be verse, shall we say, to really understand all of that.
Yeah, I would love to bounce off of that too. And especially speak to what you said, Ricky, about not thinking composition and musicology go hand in hand that easily. But I think that's why we need to collaborate more. I think musicologists need to be called into the question a lot more than they are. I think, my transfer into musicology was because I was becoming really obsessed with power. And I was like, I'm like so entrenched in these dynamics that I cannot get out and I can't ignore it anymore, So I think that just like fully put me into that. And I think there's so much space for more collaboration between performers, composers, musicologists. I think we're all like in our little bubbles in our departments. And I think there's just so much more that can be done. And Mari, I love what you said about just like going to a space and be like, this is political, before anyone can say that. And I love that. I think that's so powerful. So that was just a small comment that I wanted to make.
Well, here's the thing. That's a great comment. And the truth is, you guys are also smart and interesting. I'd happily collaborate with you. I mean, let's face it, you guys are awake and you're thinking about things that should be thought about. And that's what's interesting to me, and the things you're thinking about are interesting and dangerous. And without danger, there's no reason to do it. I mean, that's all I talk about when I coach young singers. It's like, there's nothing but competition for entertainment. And if you're not going to be dangerous and it's not going to be necessary and it's not going to ask the important questions, why bother?
I love that. And I love that, I forget who it was, but maybe Matthew brought up the vulnerability within power. I think that to me is where that danger piece comes in. And that's what makes this genre so meaningful. And in that vulnerability, Ricky, I was just reading, there was a New York Times review about green sneakers, and the New York Times said, it heals while it hurts. And I wonder if this is, again, a question for anyone, what is that process of hurting and healing, and how does it feel to have to sort of open yourself up to this kind of criticism, and how do you face critics?
Oh my God, that is it's a good question. It's an intense question, because this is what I was going to say when I sort of interrupted Matthew before, but Lucy, all right, come here. When I came upstate, like March 12th, I had this opera about to open at Lincoln Center, right? My Met commission, Intimate Apparel. And we were going to open on the 23rd. We were previewing on March 12th. The whole city got shut down and everything. I mean, I had like 10 things about to open. Everything was postponed. So I came up to the country where I am now, and I thought I need to sort of turn around. It can't be business as usual. I have to do something else. Anyway, I started a writing group, and I started writing prose and poems. And it's sort of interesting. I got a book contract from Farrar, Straus and Giroux to write a memoir. And the thing is, what I've really been writing about is because Green Sneakers is so naked and so vulnerable, right? It was basically turning myself inside out to write it. I mean, and really all of them, like Ellen West, it's like to get that right, you know? And so what I was going to say is, so in what I'm writing, I'm trying to get to the bottom of when we're in the world a long time, when we're criticized, and all of us, I'm sure every one of you have been bullied at some point, right? And when being bullied is basically the first half of your life, it is really hard not to bring that into the arena of that criticism is bullying, right? And that you are powerless over it. And what I'm trying to, like, there's a whole place in this book or something I wrote where I talk about this is when Anthony Tomasini stopped liking me. And I think I'm very clear about it. And people would say, like, never address the critics, never mention their names. And I'm like, fuck it. I'm not, that is not who I am anymore. I'm going to talk about whatever I want. And I'd rather see where the chips fall than save it so I can be politic and get a good review in the Times. Like, who the fuck cares? I'm sorry. I'm like a garbage mouth today. But I really feel angry about it. And I feel like for years I've been saving this up. And then it exploded on paper when I came up here. And I mean, that's a beautiful review of Green Sneakers. I mean, Stephen Holden gave me great reviews, except when he said that that the performer on the recording was better and it was the same person. But you know, what can you do?
Mari, did you want to chime in?
I guess I'll just comment on that because you got to the bottom of it basically. But when we go into spaces, like I said, I am mostly in choral spaces. And when it's not COVID, I'm on a plane somewhere to go speak in front of 100 people and tell them about what they're singing about. And
Right.
then, you know, sometimes they'll have me clinic them or conduct them or sing with them or something. But, you know, it always becomes a little bit more real. And it's simply not possible without the singers. But what happens is when you choose, when you have the power, we were talking about power earlier, when the spotlight is on you, you have the microphone, you have the hot potato, like you are able to say something. So if you are willing to take conversation to the deepest, darkest, scariest places, what it does is it emboldens everybody in the room to join you. And that's what I love about working with choirs, especially. But
Yeah.
I have experienced that so many times. And when I tell them my deepest, darkest truths, I'm amazed by what comes out of the musicians.
Yes. Yes. Sing it, sister. Absolutely. Yeah. That's it. If you don't, it's like, you know, that thing, if you don't live it, you don't blow it out your horn. And if you want to teach other people how to blow it out the horn, you have to tell them how you've lived.
Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's just like all just so amazing, you know. But I think I was just reading here the chat. There's a question from Julia about, you know, people trying to gauge their performance based on an audience's expectations, right? What we're hearing from our composers here is that you got to be honest, and you got to be courageous, and you have to be bold, and you have to engage. And yes, there must be that risk. If there's not that risk, if there's no danger, then it's not worth it, right? And so, yeah, those singers may be saying, oh, you know, this is a conservative church crowd, and I don't know if I should be doing blah, 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 blah. I say do it, because if we don't do it, and guess what? You might get some pushback, and if you do, guess what? Have a wonderful conversation, talk to them, and tell them, you know, engage with the audience about why you selected the poetry, why you selected that song, why you worked for weeks to perfect that and to polish that, you know, and then ask them, did you think my singing was good? You know, like, can we go there first? Did you enjoy that? And did this provoke something within you? And if the answer is yes, I did my job.
Yeah, you incited something. I mean, really, who needs any more, like, you know, patting on the back to make them comfortable? It's really like, there's enough of that. We're all, it's like, entertained to death, you know, we might as well be probed. Point.
I will say another thing is thinking about criticism historically in regards to female composers and composers of color. That's something that has not been an advance, right? Like they don't have the criticism, right? Like that's not, nobody's paying attention enough to critique it, right? So I think, you know, that's why, you know, Clara Schumann got erased. That's why Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel got erased, right? Like they just didn't have the criticism. It wasn't being written about in the newspapers, right? So I think criticism is power. It's giving you that, like, that space in the field, right? So I think, yeah, I think it's something that is actually a privilege in some senses, you know? So especially,
wow, I like thinking about it that way.
Yeah, there's I think it's Marcia Citrone who talks about gender in the musical canon. And in order for a work to sort of enter the canon, first it has to be written or published, and then it has to be performed repeatedly, and then it has to be talked about. And so you think about all the different places that cycle can be stopped. It's pretty remarkable. So I'd actually love to hear you all talk, just sort of take that, I know we're sort of running out of time, but what, in terms of new things that you're working on or new spaces that you're excited about, tell us about some things that you're looking forward to, either in pandemic times or in our post-vaccine world.
Who do you want to start? Oh.
I'll start if we can. So, you know, I sing right now with a couple of groups, Border Crossing, which is an ensemble out of Minneapolis, and they do a lot of Latin American music and works by BIPOC composers and all sorts of things that are not, quote, in the canon. There is I mean, you were talking about the development of the canon. I kind of talked a little bit about the development of the aesthetic. That should be a whole nother conference about what that means and how it oppresses us, and how it limits us. But so I sing with them, and I also sing with Exigence Vocal Ensemble, which is a Black and Latinx vocal group that's tied to Sphinx organization. And so, you know, in my participation with those groups, I get to do music that I've never heard of before, do music by women, do music by new composers, and just by living composers, you know. And so I get to engage with new stuff. Not that I don't love all the old classics. I mean, you see all my books back here. There's, you know, Schubert for days. But that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm also looking forward to, of course, one day giving more recitals featuring my sister's music, Ricky Ian's music as well. And nowadays there are more and more publications of Black composers and of women composers. And so, you know, I don't want to kind of just, oh, here's my women composer concert and then I'm done. I want to look at this music, start to embed it within my teaching repertoire, start embedding it within my own performance repertoire. So I'm looking at these really cool songs by an Argentine composer, Irma Urteaga. They're actually songs about like motherhood and putting a child to sleep. And you know, and there's one about being a wet nurse and a child coming to, you know, get nourishment from you. Obviously, that's not my experience, but I love engaging with this music because the poetry is amazing and the Spanish is beautiful and the music is so cool. So I want to kind of continue moving on those fronts.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of comments. And the first one, before I forget, is that everybody in this chat probably has, especially a female or a transgender, non-binary, BIPOC student around you that's composing music. And you need to encourage them and try to get their music programmed because, I mean, you know, I am not the only trans composer out there. You know, I'm not the only Latina out there. So, you know, I'm happy that people are discovering me, and it's certainly happened this past year that, you know, since people were spending more time online, they realized that I existed, which is good, but it's also overwhelming. And I asked myself, where were these people the whole time? So. And that goes perfectly to my other comment, which is I can't remember the last time that I had a critic or musicologist write more than like half a sentence about me in like a review. there's actually a Latina who teaches in Texas who's included me in her dissertation. So there's that, but that is not like, you know, super public and, you know, mainstream at all. So yeah, there's all of these, you see these task forces coming out of all these institutions for diversity, equity, inclusivity. And it's just like, that's not a task force, that is your mission. Move that into your mission and make that integral to what you're doing.
Yeah, that's good. I'm learning a lot from you guys. I have you know, so I'm writing this book, and then today I had my first meeting with I'm going to write an opera for Opera Theater St. Louis with my opera for the Met and Lincoln Center is Intimate Apparel with Lynn Nottage. But now we're going to write a new opera, but it's with Lynn and her daughter Ruby. So I'm really excited about that. They're both writing the libretto. And then so Intimate Apparel will open next January in Lincoln Center. And then I have another opera opening from New York City Opera called The Garden of the Finzi Contini. But yeah, and now I have a new song cycle I wrote. Do you know Erin Morley? She's a lovely singer. So she's going to record it. But I really like, Matthew, when you were talking, I was like, I want to see a concert where the man does Frauenleben and the woman does Winterreise. That's interesting.
Let me know. I'll be there. I'll do
Okay.
it.
All right. Okay.
Somebody did it in my college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did that exact thing.
It's so interesting. I love that.
I think we had a question. Is Martha still on? We had a raised hand earlier. If you want to.
Yeah, that was me. Hi.
Hi, Martha.
Hi. I had a question really about separating characterization from gender in art song, because so much of poetry is meant to be internal. And also really, I'd love it if I could hear you all speak about the pianist's role in all of this, because I feel like we've heard a lot about singers, and I'm a singer, but I would love to hear about what this means for the pianists involved, because art song is such a collaborative, dual, like equal partnership. And yeah, that's all.
I just want to make a quick Go ahead. Just a quick comment. I think, poetry to me isn't an internal art. Poetry should be an external and performed art, right? Things are realized as you breathe life into these words, as you hear the consonants and the ways that the vowels come together. So I think that's at least my understanding, that poetry is not a silent art. It's not an internal art. It is a very outward and expressive art, which then can lead to all sorts of gendered things. But I'll let Ricky go.
Well, no, I was just going to say, Martha, for me, it's a dialogue. It's a conversation. I don't think of the pianist as the accompanist. I hate that word. I really get upset when I see the una corda go down. For me, it's all about, if there's two people on the stage, then they're having a conversation, and they should both be as engaged, and they are both telling that story, and the story can't be told by one of them. It needs both of them.
May I ask, what does that mean then in this conversation about gender?
To me, it just means you have to be present to what's happening. It's whatever issue is being raised for the singer or that is being raised to you too. Be in the conversation. Keep it simple.
If you want to be really nerdy and geek out on this, go look up The Composer's Voice by theorist Edward T. Cohn. He talks about this very specifically, Martha, about there's a persona that emerges from the accompaniment, there's a persona that emerges from the vocalist, there's a persona that emerges from the combination of the two. There's a persona from the composer. It's a whole thing. And my research and my work has been to take that, because that was so gendered, and it's also kind of structural in a way and hierarchical in a way, and I'm like, no, let's break that all down, right, and just open ourselves up for some possibilities. A lot of the reading from these this idea of persona emerging from singer and pianist are like, well, the singer must be the man and the pianist must be the woman who's serving the man. There's a lot of layered stuff in there, and yeah, they're just like, you can go nerd out and look at some of that.
I wonder if we could turn to Chloe on this question too, because, again, in thinking about a sound world that's created, I think there's a lot of sort of essentializing that happens and thinking about different kinds of sounds from both the singer and the pianist. Is that something you want to run with a little bit, Chloe?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Matthew, like you nailed it. I was gonna tell you, well, I wasn't gonna say nerd out because that's just my normal state of being, but I was gonna say that you should definitely, yeah, Edward T. Cone is where it's at. But it's really is. I mean, instruments are gendered, right? And of course, so the piano. I mean, yeah. Also, sometimes women are at the piano and they're supposed to be invisible, but sometimes when women are singing, like that's where your eyes should be. That's the spectacle, right? So it really just depends, and it's changing all the time. And I think like, I mean, just today in the lecture today that Dr. Armstrong gave, he was talking about the oud as like one of the first accompanimental instruments. And I'm saying accompanimental like intentionally because the singer was, playing with for themselves. And so I think it really just changed in the Schubertiad sense, but I think in song more generally, there are accompanimental instruments. I think the way that we see our art form is a little bit more like pianist should not be accompanist, right? But I think it just depends on the tradition. I think it historically, like, every century it's changing in terms of the gendering of certain instruments. So those are just some other things to think about.
And Mari, did you want to jump in?
I would just quick comment that like, since I've started to get noticed, like pianists coming to me asking if I write for piano, and I say all the time, but it's usually in a choral piece, but it's especially in the art song. And I find that it's so liberating to write art song because it's a duet essentially, or more. And I find it's so difficult to write for the piano, like to write well for the piano, because it really is a symphony orchestra unto itself, or it can be. And I was just thinking the reverse of that, of when what the piano plays is so sparse, but even that is so powerful and has so much to say. So, it's a lot of power that a composer can have, specifically with a pianist that can do all the things, which is, an extreme privilege. But it's daunting as a composer, frankly. Like, see, when I'm writing for the voice, almost all the answers are immediate with the words. But when I'm writing for the piano, there's a whole universe that you can explore. And when I manage to finish a piece of music, the piano part is always interesting.
I want to see, I think Alain has a question or a comment.
Alain.
Hi, sure. I want to just quickly jump in and ask a question about this big wide world that we're living in, right? There's art song and there's this world of classical music and everything that we do within our sort of cultural ecosystem. But we're living in this amazing world that is doing just so many different things, right? And gender in popular music, for instance, is really a huge issue. And gender representation and the sort of the takeover of gender representation, and I'm thinking of who knows, I mean, so many different people, Lady Gaga and all the way around. And so I'm just wondering how that impacts the way that you think of yourself as an artist, and what are you responding to, and how are you incorporating that conversation in what you do in your work, in your artistry. And I will disappear.
I could speak to that quickly.
Go please, Cloe.
So that was one of the things that was hard for me going into classical voice as an undergrad, was that I had grown up with like popular music, you know, and that just wasn't taught the same way. And so what I'm finding now is kind of like I've gone away from popular music into classical voice, now into classical musicology, and now I'm back to popular music studies. And honestly, like they interact so much. This like binary that we have between pop and art is just completely rooted in racism, and it's just so colonial. And I think, you know, I've started like bringing a lot of more Latin American songs into my voice lessons, and boleros are really important to me, to my family history too. And so I think, you know, popular music is always there, and I try to even just deconstruct the idea that one is art and one is popular. Obviously, there are things that differentiate them, like mass dissemination, technology, all these things. But I think people don't notice the subtlety that is in, like, oh, popular music is popular because it's simpler or it's easier, which is not true. It's, you know, it's more focused on rhythm, more focused on dance. There's a different function, right? And so we just need to prioritize thinking about those constructions differently. And definitely it's been really, really important to me in my work, both as a musicologist and a singer, is to kind of like grapple with those tensions and kind of try to find a place where I can do both.
You know, and actually, I think I maybe lied a little earlier because I said I wanted to do these other recitals, but I want to do so many recitals. And in one of the recitals I want to do is to do some more popular music. And honestly, I want to do some music where there's like prose instead of poetry as the text that's being set, because I think that that's, again, kind of removing from, like, you know, high art poetry and just like kind of whatever people write. And of course, there's like some stuff within the canon that's already there, but there's a lot of new things that are being written. And so giving life to that and bringing that out, I'm excited with that, because yeah, we do need to build these bridges. I will tell you, none of my students came in to my studio here in Colorado wanting to just sing Puccini or just sing Schubert or something. They want to do theater, and they're like, can I sing this ranchera that we did whenever I was growing up, and can I sing this country song that my dad always cries to? Yeah. Well, let's make it all happen.
I was this Alain. I just mostly just feel like in whatever I do in the world, I just want to get to the bottom of my own authenticity and make sure I'm telling the truth.
I think something that you know, has come up from each of you just as we've been talking is your focus in the work, in the text. And it's like the process is such an important piece of it for you. And to me, that is set apart from this idea of having like geniuses in the field, or people who are sort of, yeah, set above, and we must always approach this work in the same way. But does the idea of genius, is that intimidating, or has that been intimidating to any of you at all? Or like that sort of ideal of making it at a certain level? Do you ever feel like there's a destination that you're going to and you'll know when you get there?
I'm more concerned about making like enough money to survive. I think that's probably where most people are, at least people my age. I think that it's a little silly, frankly, that we, you know, choose a handful of white German men to make our forever teachers. You know, it's just one language of music. It's just one version of the story that we tell. So I think it's silly. Of course, I want my music to get performed, and I want to be paid, and I want to write new music, and I want to keep that cycle going. But it's really an act of service. When I'm doing my best work and when I collaborate with musicians, it's really an act of service, at least to tell a story. And I think that, I mean, that's really where my focus is. If that makes me a genius, then bow down and kiss the ring, but you know, at the same time, like that's really silly.
Thank you for that.
All those delineations, I mean, it's like everybody likes them, but all the awards, all of those things, in a way, really, they just end up separating people. They make these people feel bad and they make these people feel good. And so, in the same way that all the little alligators have to struggle to get to the water before all the animals eat them, if you're an artist in the world, you have to struggle to sort of get rid of the noise about who won the Grammy and the poopy and the this and the that, and just do your work. Just do your work and do the best you can and make beauty in this world that needs it.
Yeah, I think it's really just like an act of division and of privilege and of hierarchy and all that stuff. But it is also kind of an act of violence against ourselves. It separates us from who we could be and maybe who we want to be, right? You hear that recording of that great aria and you think, oh God, I don't know if I can do that. And that is, of course, not helpful, but that whole psychology and the thing you have to navigate through, it's too much. And yes, we want to hear these things and be inspired by them, but this is what I teach my student. It's like, I want you to live your journey. I want you to use your voice, and we'll try to make that as free and easy and expressive as possible. Please don't listen to that recording and try to be like Renee. I know she's fabulous, but please don't,
Do you know who I think, just to say quickly, I've known Billy Porter forever, and I love what he's doing. Like when he started wearing those gorgeous evening gowns, I love that. I love Billy. It's so, I don't know, he's so true to himself lately, and it's enchanting to watch.
I just wanted to quickly amplify what you're saying, Madi, too, about just like, I can't think about genius. I need to pay the bills, and I think like this is kind of our perpetual struggle as artists in this capitalist world, is like what they want from us is pure expressivity, but we need to commodify it and package it first so that it's palatable, so that it's accessible or original or brand new, right? And I think that burden is way stronger for marginalized people. Like we need to be able to not offend if we want to be thought of as geniuses, right? And so especially if you're like brave enough to kind of be like, this is political right off the bat, then I could see that it's even harder. So I think it's just, we're constantly reckoning with expressivity versus exploitation, basically.
I just want to say the word that came up in my mind, Chloe is like right on exactly 100% what I'm trying to say. When Ricky and Gordon was talking last, the word that came to my mind is scarcity complex. And I find that, that's what I would use to describe that. I actually got that word from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York. But it's so useful because when people have to compete to survive and have the attitude that once I've got mine, you got to go get your own, that is 100% what's wrong with the world. So as artists, it's a constant struggle, at least for me, to challenge that notion with the idea of abundance and just what can we accomplish if we dare to imagine and dare to believe and dare to invest in the idea that there's an abundance of pieces of pies to have, abundance of chairs to have at the table. I think we need to really, that's really the opposite of scarcity. And I think the biggest illusion that we fall slave to is that there's not enough for everybody when there actually is.
Well, I think that is actually a great note to end on. You all are so full of so much abundance of beauty in your work and in your approach to this conversation. And thank you so much for everything that you've shared with all of us. I know this has certainly been an inspiring conversation for me, and I'm sure for our audience members too. And really, I just can't thank you enough for showing up and doing the work that you're doing in your everyday lives too. So we all look forward to tracking what is next for all of you. And I'm going to turn things back over to Alain, who's going to introduce the next portion of the program with the Wandering.
Okay, thank you. So
Sounds
can
great.
we leave now, or?
You can all stay there. I'm going to come and join you. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. I'm going to put myself. There we go. Here I am. So
Thank you, Cathy.
Cathy, thank you so much.
Yes.
That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you to all. Thank you to our wonderful audience and the questions that came. For those of you who are wandering around in the chat room or in Slack or wherever you might be, I just want to say that you've taken this summit into an illuminated place that feels so special, and setting the stage for the next conversations to follow this evening, and then tomorrow we have students who will be having a really interesting conversation at 9 o'clock tonight. So I've decided I'm going to put on my pajamas and come and hang out for a bit. And before we go, everybody, I just want to say that we're going to invite Jeremy Weiss back in to talk to us a little bit about the next episode of his incredible work. So Jeremy, let's see, I'm going to bring you in as well. How about that? There's Jeremy. So welcome, Jeremy, and have a little quick conversation here.
That was an unbelievably energizing panel. So thank you guys so much for your work. I want to say that we, in The Wandering, we worked to address many of the issues you guys are talking about directly, particularly in the next episodes that are coming up, these issues of identity and self-discovery and embodiment and gender embodiment with music and art song. So we really hope that all of you guys will tune in particular the people that are on this panel. I think you'll really enjoy it. Episode 3 in particular, which is released tomorrow at noon, has a big number that addresses these issues very directly. So tonight's episode begins kind of that journey of kind of self-discovery and gender in art songs. So you can watch the episode. It'll be released tonight. The episode 2 will be released tonight at 8 p.m. Episode 3 tomorrow at noon, and then the final episode at 6 p.m. You can view them all at experiencethewandering.com/summit. experiencethewandering.com/summit. We'll be here at the start of each episode, and somebody will be in this Zoom room all the time in case any of you guys have any questions. Like I said, this is a work that involves a lot of new technology, so if any of you guys need any help along the way, we will be here to help you. We fixed some bugs from this morning that are already ready to go. So again, really looking forward to continuing the discussion of these topics through the piece. So thank you guys so much again. That was really
Thank you.
exciting talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Thank you all. Okay, well, we'll get rid of these spotlights now and just open it up to everybody if you want to stick around and if you want to.
I'm gonna go have my Passover Seder.
Oh my goodness!
Goodbye, everybody.
Fantastic. Yeah, Ricky, thank you so much, Ricky. It's really wonderful to see you.
It was my pleasure.
Very special.
Thank you.
And we'll just keep flowing along a little bit here.
And
bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Take care. Nope, he's gone.
And for everyone else, please, make sure you check out episode 2 at 8, and the student panel at 9 p.m. is going to be pretty spectacular. So please make sure you come back to this Zoom room for that at 9 p.m.
Great. So, how are we all doing? Take a deep breath. The panel discussion was knockout amazing. That was such a fabulous conversation. And hopefully
that was wonderful.
Yeah, that was really very special. And so exciting. We've been working on this summit for a while, and you never quite know, what it's going to look like when it comes out of the oven, and this is just amazing. So thank you.
Thank you for setting this up and getting us all on board. This is incredible. I try to do my little work in my own little world, but we need to have discussions like this. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Matthew. It's really, I loved what you had to say, and it just sounds like you're such a fabulous teacher, giving people power to be who they are in such an authentic way. Really, very special.
It's my hope.
He is, and this didn't even really come up, but Matthew has a role at Adams State as a diversity and inclusion excellence liaison.
Yeah, so inclusive excellence liaison, it's kind of a, inclusive excellence is a new kind of like buzzword term in higher ed, but really I kind of do diversity, equity, inclusion stuff here. I chair a committee and I talk to the president, I sit on the cabinet, and too many things. But I'm glad to participate and try to, I'm glad to help out. I think it's, that work has really informed my teaching because it's helped me to be more inclusive of my students. Not that I was a very exclusive person to begin with, but it's just opened my eyes up to many more things and to many more experiences that we have. So yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
I think that's really important work that he's doing. And then I just want to make a plug because, as I was thinking about getting ready for this conversation, I listened to a lot of Mari's music on her website, and and Matthew is featured in many of the art songs that are there. And I would really encourage all of you, listen to her music and buy her music and program it. And Chloe's excellent thesis from 2017 is also available online through your local university website. So also I would say, really that would be a great thing for everyone to check out and keep watching for their names. Ricky and Gordon also has, a few recordings out there. And some songbooks, and definitely check those out as well. But just a plug to, take this work further.
Julia, you have something to say?
Yeah. Hey, Cathy, I wanted to ask you, you did such a great job channeling the energy of these wonderful panelists. I was wondering if there were any topics or angles that you considered but then decided that's going to open up a whole other can of worms. I'm just wondering, your experience as the facilitator, as the moderator, I'm sure that had its own little particular challenges.
Oh yeah, well, thank you for that question. Well, not gonna lie, it's sort of intimidating thinking about going into a conversation like this, and with all of the diverse kinds of experiences and identities that the panelists bring. I guess my goal was to keep things as open-ended as I could, so that everyone could really feel like they could offer what they wanted to offer to the conversation. I feel like a lot of the time it's like a lot of the time performers and composers maybe get into these questions of something being binary, like is your performance this or that? Is your composition style that or the other thing? And there's so much gray area to be explored, and that, as we saw in the discussion today, that's really the exciting part about innovation, and that's really the celebration of new and recharged and refreshed work. So that's was really interesting.
Something that's really interesting. You're making me think of entrepreneurial theory, and entrepreneurial theory is often about the spaces between things rather than the things themselves. And this evening's conversation was a lot about that too.